When we visualize the tactical brilliance of the Roman military machine, one iconic image instantly dominates our imagination: the Testudo, or the tortoise formation. Popular culture and cinema have sterilized this maneuver, presenting it as a flawless, impenetrable, and robotic geometric box of gleaming bronze and painted wood sliding effortlessly across the battlefield. It is depicted as the ultimate defensive trump card, an invincible mobile fortress. But this sanitized Hollywood portrayal entirely masks the brutal, agonizing, and fundamentally terrifying reality of ancient warfare. To truly understand the Testudo, we must strip away the cinematic polish and place ourselves directly inside the dark, suffocating center of the formation. The reality of the Roman tortoise was not an experience of invulnerability. It was a desperate, highly claustrophobic endurance test. It was a sensory nightmare designed to keep men alive in the most hostile environments imaginable, forcing them to trade their mobility, their vision, and their individual agency for the sheer mathematical probability of surviving a catastrophic barrage. When a centurion blew the harsh, bone-chilling note on his cornu and screamed the order to form the Testudo, the legionaries felt a deep, instinctive dread. They knew they were about to enter a dark, suffocating mobile prison where the very air they breathed would become choked with dust. The primary instrument of this mobile fortress was the Roman scutum, a masterpiece of military engineering. Contrary to the misconception that it was a simple, flat piece of timber, the scutum was a complex, convex composite board. It was constructed from 3 layers of thin wood strips, glued together at right angles, effectively the ancient equivalent of heavy-duty plywood. This was covered in canvas, bound in thick calfskin leather, and edged with a rim of bronze or iron to prevent splintering. At the center sat the umbo, a heavy iron shield boss. A single scutum weighed anywhere from 8 to 10 kilograms. The men forming the roof of the tortoise had to lift this massive, awkward, curved sail of wood and iron directly above their heads, locking the edges perfectly with their neighbors to ensure there were absolutely no gaps. They could not rest the shield on their helmets. The concussive force of an impact would break their necks. They had to support the entire weight using only the static, agonizingly tense muscles of their shoulders and back. Furthermore, this was not a static posture. They had to maintain this excruciating overhead lock while marching in perfect unison over broken, blood-soaked ground, entirely blind, stumbling over discarded weapons and corpses. The entire structure was a fragile organism held together purely by the desperate straining muscle fibers of exhausted men. If the physical strain of holding a 10-kilogram shield above your head was agonizing, the acoustic environment inside the Testudo was a profound psychological torture. When the formation entered the enemy's kill zone, usually near the towering walls of a besieged city, the tense silence of the march was instantly shattered by an overwhelming, apocalyptic sensory overload. We must imagine the horrifying ASMR of an ancient siege from the perspective of a man trapped entirely in the dark. The enemy defenders on the walls above did not simply shoot arrows. They unleashed a continuous, devastating barrage of kinetic energy. Heavy, iron-tipped arrows rained down by the thousands. When an arrow struck the layered plywood of the scutum inches above a soldier's face, it did not make a cinematic thwack. It sounded like a massive, violent explosion of cracking timber. The heavy iron point would bite deep into the wood, splintering the internal layers with a deafening, sharp crack. Now multiply that specific sound by hundreds of impacts every single second. The roof of the Testudo became a giant, echoing wooden drum, beaten mercilessly by a chaotic, terrifying rhythm of death. Beyond arrows, the defenders hurled heavy lead sling bullets, stones the size of a human head, and massive iron darts from torsion ballistae. When a 50-pound stone block dropped from a 40-foot wall onto the roof of the Tortoise, the concussive shock wave was devastating. The deafening, resonant crash of heavy stone shattering against iron-rimmed wood was accompanied by the terrifying, high-pitched groaning of the shield beneath it, bending and warping under the catastrophic kinetic impact. The soldier holding that shield would feel the bone-jarring vibration shoot directly down his arms and into his spine, fighting with every ounce of his remaining strength to prevent the wood from collapsing onto his skull. And then came the incendiaries. Defenders poured boiling pitch, scalding water, and burning sand down onto the advancing shell. The soldiers inside would hear the horrific, aggressive hissing of boiling liquids striking the thick leather covers of their shields. They would smell the acrid, choking smoke of burning pine pitch and the sickening stench of singed animal hide. The noise inside the formation was so absolutely deafening that verbal communication was rendered entirely impossible. A centurion could scream at the top of his lungs, and the man standing directly next to him would hear nothing but the apocalyptic, percussive roar of the bombardment. This extreme acoustic isolation compounded the terrifying claustrophobia. You were surrounded by 80 of your brothers, pressed so tightly against them that you could feel their rapidly beating hearts. Yet you were entirely alone in a deafening, echoing box that was being hammered to pieces as the Testudo ground its way forward, taking step after agonizing step under the relentless bombardment. The internal microenvironment of the formation rapidly deteriorated into a suffocating, literal hell. The sheer density of human bodies was the primary culprit. 80 heavily armed and armored men, wrapped in thick wool tunics, heavy iron chainmail or articulated plate armor, and carrying massive wooden shields, were compressed into an unbelievably tight rectangular footprint. The ambient temperature inside this sealed human box skyrocketed almost immediately. The Testudo essentially functioned as an unventilated, dark oven. Under the scorching Mediterranean sun or the humid heat of a Middle Eastern summer campaign, the temperature inside the shell could easily exceed unbearable levels. The legionaries sweat profusely, their bodies desperately trying to cool down under the massive exertion of holding up the heavy roof. This collective sweat instantly vaporized, creating a thick, incredibly humid and suffocating microclimate. The air grew stagnant, heavy, and extremely difficult to breathe. The men were inhaling the hot, exhausted breath of the soldiers crushed against them, mixed with the choking, dry dust, kicked up by 80 pairs of heavy hobnailed boots shuffling blindly across the dirt. Oxygen deprivation became a very real and present physiological threat. As the formation slowed under the weight of the attack, panic threatened to set in. The claustrophobia was absolute. You could not raise your arms. They were locked in place. You could not turn your head. It was pinned by the shoulders of the men next to you. If a man in the center of the formation suffered a heat stroke or collapsed from the sheer physical exhaustion, he could not simply drop to the ground. The immense crush of the bodies around him would hold him upright, dragging his dead weight forward while his shield slipped, creating a fatal vulnerability in the roof above. And this was the ultimate terror of the physical crush, the devastating domino effect. If the formation was hit by a massive boulder that shattered a shield and crushed the man holding it, the gap had to be closed instantly. The surrounding men, already pushed to their physical breaking point, had to violently shove their own shields into the newly opened space to plug the hole, completely blinding themselves to the chaos unfolding right beside them. They had to step directly over the writhing, screaming body of their fallen comrade, unable to look down, unable to help, their boots slipping on his blood in the darkness, solely focused on keeping the roof sealed. The Testudo demanded the absolute, ruthless suppression of human empathy in favor of cold, structural survival. You became a structural pillar in a building made of flesh and wood. If the Testudo was such a horrific, claustrophobic, and physically devastating experience, why did the Roman military rely on it so heavily? The answer lies in the cold, calculating pragmatism of the Roman state and their unique understanding of battlefield mathematics. The Testudo was never designed to be comfortable. It was designed to be statistically efficient. In siege warfare, or when facing enemies with overwhelming archery superiority like the Parthian cataphracts, standing in the open meant total annihilation. The Romans recognized that a loose formation would be systematically shredded by projectile fire. The Tortoise formation was a brilliant, albeit brutal, tactical trade-off. They traded speed, visibility, and individual comfort for the mathematical probability of delivering a critical mass of heavily armored infantry directly to the base of the enemy walls. Yes, the formation was agonizingly slow. Yes, the physical toll on the human body was monstrous. Yes, men would inevitably die from crushing impacts that broke through the roof. But the structure itself would survive. It allowed the Roman military machine to bypass the fatal kill zone that would have stopped any other ancient army in its tracks. When the Testudo finally reached the base of the fortification, the true lethality of the formation was unleashed. On command, the roof would open, the heavy shields would drop, and the suffocating darkness would be instantly replaced by the blinding light of the sun and the flash of drawn steel. The men, fueled by the intense adrenaline of surviving the suffocating nightmare of the shell, unleashed their pent-up psychological tension in a sudden, catastrophic wave of violence against the enemy defenders. The legacy of the Roman Testudo is a profound testament to the power of extreme psychological conditioning and institutional discipline. It proves that the true strength of the Roman legions did not lie solely in the sharpness of their swords or the engineering of their armor, but in their unparalleled ability to conquer their own human instincts, to voluntarily march into a dark, suffocating box, to stand blindly under a rain of crushing stone and iron, and to trust your life entirely to the man standing next to you, requires a level of psychological fortitude that is difficult for the modern mind to fully comprehend. The Testudo was the ultimate physical manifestation of the Roman concept of martial courage. It was not a magical, impenetrable force field. It was a terrifying, claustrophobic meat grinder that tested the absolute limits of human endurance. When we picture the Roman tortoise, we must stop seeing a perfect geometric shape sliding across a map. We must see 80 exhausted, terrified men, trapped in a stifling, deafening darkness, their muscles screaming in agony, bound together by nothing but sheer will and the heavy wood of their shields, marching relentlessly forward.